Hi, this is Bruce Whipple, and welcome to the Business Acquisition Podcast. This is where we talk about how to acquire an already profitable business rather than build one from scratch. In the past 25 years, I've acquired several businesses, and I've also built several businesses from scratch. And I can tell you that it's a lot easier to do the former rather than the latter. You may know me from my association with Dan Peña, who I've worked with and been partners with for more than 25 years. Dan is gracious enough to mention me quite often in his videos, and it's been a real pleasure working with Dan, and one of the few people that I call a true friend. And actually, we've worked on many acquisitions together as well. And even though I said it was easier to acquire a business rather than build one from scratch, that doesn't necessarily mean it's easy. I often say that QLA is simple, but please don't make the mistake of thinking that simple is the same thing as easy. It still requires hard work. So you're ready to begin the acquisition trail. You've been through why this is important to you, what the biggest obstacles are. You've looked at how to identify an avatar, which is really important. And let's go through those questions just quickly once again. So what you're trying to answer for your ideal client is, what keeps them awake at night? Indigestion boiling up in their esophagus, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. What are they afraid of? What are they angry about? Or who are they angry at? What are their 3 top daily frustrations? What trends are occurring and will occur in their business or lives? What do they secretly, ardently desire most? Is there a built-in bias to the way they make decisions? For example, engineers are exceptionally analytical. Do they have their own language? By that, is there a technical language or acronyms they refer to? Who else is selling something similar to them and how? And then who else has tried selling to them something similar and how has that effort failed? Really important to keep in mind as you're going through picking an industry. So how do you go about picking an industry? Good question, right? So you know or think you know you want to acquire a business, but in what industry, right? Lots of industries out there. So when you start to figure that out, it's a great idea to set some criteria by which you can actually do that. So let's talk about those. You want that industry to be fragmented, and by that, lots of different owners, primarily composed of mom and pops, which are typically, although they can run good businesses, not terribly sophisticated. Oftentimes, they're so busy working in the business that they don't work on the business. They may do everything. They may do the actual work, they may do the bookkeeping, they may answer the phones, et cetera, et cetera. So they have a lot of areas in which there's low-hanging fruit, oftentimes that can be improved, which is what you're looking for. You want that industry to have high profit margins, and by that, a minimum of 20%. And candidly, the reason for that is, and I don't mean to insult you here, is that if you're just beginning in business or you're just beginning in acquisitions, you're not that good to run a really tight business as far as margin. You know, I've had people approach me that say, and particularly this is the case in some businesses like construction, well, the margins are 5 or 10%. That is not a lot of room. So if, as most of us do when we begin something, we make mistakes, we don't have the cash flow to handle the debt service, we don't have the cash flow to end up covering the expenses of the business, paying employees, et cetera, et cetera. And if that's the case, then guess what? You've got to come out of your own pocket to make payroll, to keep the lights on, to keep the phones working, or whatever other expenses you have, not the least of which is probably keeping the bank happy with the loan that you've gotten to acquire a business. So it's really important to have some margin, and no pun intended, a margin that gives you a margin of error so that if you make mistakes, you're not in a negative cash position. You want to go through and understand the pain points in that industry. We talked about that, and that's the whole reason for the avatar questions that I reviewed at the beginning of this podcast. And if you want to take a look at understanding what some of those pain points are, a great way to do that is to go on to Amazon and put whatever keyword you have into the search. It'll give you a ton of books. That's what Amazon originally started doing. And then start to look at those books. You don't have to buy anything. And take a look at what those 1-star reviews are, not the 5-star reviews. You want the 1-star review. And let's say, just to pick something, that you were looking at the nursing home, elder care, assisted living space. And you take a look at the books which have information on that subject or those subjects. Take a look at the 1-star reviews, and you might see something like, this book was terrible. I was searching for a nursing home for my mother, and the biggest problem we found was whatever it is. And then this book didn't even talk about that. And maybe that's something like cleanliness of the facility, activity for the residents in the facility, medical care and the quality of medical care. That'll be specific to the industry. But those 1-star reviews, if you write those issues down, gives you a really good insight into your industry and what people find as a frustration. Then, if you can be the first one, which is sometimes tough to solve that problem, or a little more easy, be better than those other businesses, you really have something to offer. And why is that important? It's important to have a competitive advantage, but it's as equally important is you're going to, and we'll talk about this in the future, surround yourself with a dream team. You may not have business experience. You may not have acquisition experience. You may not even have experience in the industry that you're looking to consolidate. But that doesn't mean that you can't surround yourself with people who do and give you that credibility. And it's one thing to say you want to acquire, for instance, nursing homes. Probably a lot of people do that, right? And it's one thing to say that you want to acquire nursing homes. It's a totally other thing to say that you want to acquire nursing homes, you've researched the industry, here's the biggest problem, and here's the solution to that problem. That then, when you go to recruit people for a dream team, they say, oh, I see what you're doing. You're doing something different here. So there's some interest that might not be there if the approach was just, we want to acquire nursing homes. So, and if you want to vet out an industry, oftentimes when you build a dream team, and we'll talk about that as I mentioned, you're going to select an anchor chairman first. But another approach, if you're not sure of the industry, is to go ahead and talk to some industry experts. And we'll talk about how you do that, how do you get in touch with them, how do you eventually get a conversation with them. And with them, you want to explain that you are looking at this industry, you understand they have background or experience in this industry. If we choose this industry, we are going to add an industry expert to our board of directors. You might be interested in that. You might not be interested in that. But we can certainly find out from this discussion. So I want you to know that I'm not just here to pick your brain. This may be an opportunity that fits with what you want to do. And if we're a fit, I want you to know that the board members will never be asked to contribute capital. And in fact, founding board members will be given an opportunity to have equity. They don't have to buy it. It will be given to them. Now the person has some reason for wanting to talk to you rather than just have their brain picked. And when you talk to those industry experts, you're going to be basically vetting out this process. Remember those avatar questions. Ask them about those avatar questions. And that will begin to say, okay, is this really an industry that has merit? Is there something we can do first or different? And if that's the case, does it fit with the rest of the criteria? Profit margin, et cetera, et cetera. So what are some of the questions you might want to know? Might want to know who else is doing a consolidation. For instance, if you were in the stationery business, paper products, et cetera, or if you were in the hardware business, people like Home Depot, Office Max, Staples, et cetera, have pretty well consolidated and owned that business. So there's not a ton of room there. So you want to know who the big players are, how much of the industry has been consolidated. Ideally, you want that to be reasonably small so that there's room for you to acquire these businesses. Who else is buying the businesses, and at what multiple of cash flow or EBITDA are they buying them? If they're a public company and they've got a PE that is off the charts, They may be paying a price for these, knowing that when they roll it into their business, that they have a PE which allows them to do that, make that process work, and then just go buy another one, another one, another one. But if you are starting out, that purchase price or multiple of EBITDA may not give you the ability to handle your debt service, and you certainly want to be able to handle your debt service. Again, you don't want to come out of your pocket. So, and it's important when you look at those businesses and do an analysis, is to take a look at them the way they sit now. Can that business and does that business have a free cash flow that can be able to service your debt payments from that cash flow? Not after, well, if I increase the revenue by 20% and I decrease the expenses, that it works. No. Does that work from day one? Big mistake. People look optimistically on their acquisitions and they think, well, if I do this and I do that, it'll work. Don't do that. The only thing worse than doing a no acquisition is to do a bad acquisition, because you will end up having to come out of your pocket. So that is some of how you think about picking an industry and what industry might be right for you. Okay, so if you have any questions or comments or ideas for future episodes, please email bruce@brucewhipple.com. And if you're not already on our mailing list, head over to brucewhipple.com and sign up and grab any of the free reports. That'll put you on the mailing list. There is a lot of free information you can use to acquire already profitable businesses. This is Bruce Whipple. Thanks for listening to the Business Acquisition Podcast. And remember, you miss 100% of the opportunities you failed to take. And procrastination truly is the thief of time. So do something today, please. Your future self will be proud of you.